Welcome to Pursuit of Passion. I'm Chef Jamie Bordonaro, here to share with you at home recipes, tips, and techniques to give you the tools to cook memorable meals for you and your loved ones. Today's episode will feature a spiced meatloaf. Why meatloaf, you ask? Well, aside from it being an American comfort food staple, meatloaf was the first recipe that I tried to tackle, if you can call it a recipe, with my own creative spin. It was a time that I was an amateur cook at best, and it was the first recipe I put together. I wanted to cook dinner one day, and so I tried to make an Italian meatloaf. Different seasonings, different fresh ingredients, peppers, things like that you wouldn't traditionally find in meatloaf. Now, of course, I knew nothing about seasoning or cooking in general, really. So, technically speaking, the meatloaf turned out to be a bit of a disaster. However, thinking back to my early childhood memories where my grandmother would prepare these delicious meals for all of us, especially around the holidays, and seeing the amount of love and fulfillment that it gave her to nourish the whole family and all of her loved ones, it really made an impact on me and stayed with me. And so when I thought about taking these raw ingredients through the act of cooking and transforming these ingredients into something that was so delicious, it really delivered the same emotional response that my grandmother gave to all of us. So connecting the concept of cooking as a way to deliver that same sort of emotional, welcoming, joyous, fulfilling sensation to others really clicked for me at that moment. Although I wasn't technically skilled yet, it started the journey that I've been on for the past 12 years. So, now that I've worked at some fancy restaurants, if you will, and developed my skills and evolved as a chef, we're going to put a little technical spin on meatloaf and create a delicious meal that you can do at home for you and your loved ones. So, let's cook. The featured ingredient today, I was inspired by a trip to the local market. Pimenton, that is a Spanish pepper spice. It is super delicious, a little spicy kick that'll really elevate the meatloaf experience, give you something unexpected. Adobo seasoning, which is a nice blend of garlic powder, turmeric, oregano, really great savory seasoning that goes well with the pimenton. And also smoked paprika, which is absolutely phenomenal, has a touch of sweetness to it, as well as, of course, smokiness. And this is all going to really transform this delicious meatloaf blend into something that you may not have experienced before. So, for our meatloaf mix, we have a beautiful bright blend. It's about an 80-20 meat to fat ratio, which gives you a really nice moist end product. And I used a mixture of veal, pork, and beef. And you can usually find that in the grocery store labeled meatloaf mix. So conveniently enough, that's what we're using today. To elevate and enhance the meatloaf experience, we have eggs, which serve to bind the meatloaf together. It gives you the loaf structure, if you will. And some milk will moisten the meatloaf. We want it to be mouth-wateringly luscious and delicious when it's cooked. I also have some panko breadcrumbs. These are plain. Sometimes I'll use Italian seasoning, but in this case we have our seasonings already, so we don't want to overshadow those. The breadcrumbs will serve as a binder, but they also kind of a counterintuitive thought, if you will, is the breadcrumbs themselves. Yes, they're a dry product, but they actually help to absorb moisture, which ends up creating a more moist meatloaf at the end. And then to elevate, I always talk about subtleties and nuances in cooking, and a beautiful way to add that and to enhance the meatloaf is with our aromatics. So I spiced all of these vegetables with the same spices we're going to put in the meatloaf. we have onion, carrot, and celery. Also some garlic as well. And then lastly, to add another kick, if you will, to the meatloaf, chipotles and adobo sauce. It's really, really fragrant, aromatic, and of course a touch spicy as well. It'll go great with all of our spices. So let's get to it. Now, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, a really underrated tool in the kitchen to have are food-safe gloves. Really great to prevent cross-contamination, and it just tones down the mess, because mess always leads to stress, and I'm all about stress-free cooking. So here we go. And of course, although I didn't mention it, the ubiquitous kosher salt, in order to allow our taste buds to salivate and to experience all the other flavors that we have. So we'll start with our meat. I kind of spread it out a little bit to give you a greater surface area to work with. That way you can more thoroughly season the meatloaf. So we'll start with kosher salt, seasoning from a height so that it spreads nice and evenly and covers the surface area. With one hand, I'm going to go ahead and flip over our meat so we can season more thoroughly. And doing this, gently turning it, will actually help you to prevent over-mixing it, which we don't want to do, because when you over-mix your meatloaf, it ends up creating a tough end product, which we definitely don't want. Even if we use all these ingredients to create moisture, a more moist finished product, it might appear a little bit drier just because of the over-mixing. So, what I always say about over-mixing your meatloaf, I would do anything for love, but I won't do that. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Don't over-mix your meatloaf. So, obviously I'm not a professionally trained vocalist, but if that helps to permanently imprint that statement in your mind, then fantastic. We'll season the other side nice and evenly with the kosher salt. And don't worry, there will not be an encore, I promise. Next up, our smoked paprika. And I'm going to place about 1.5 tablespoons altogether. Adobo seasoning, again, that's got the garlic powder, the turmeric, as well as some black pepper in there. I want to be a bit liberal with this seasoning. It's really, really savory and delicious. And lastly, the beautiful pimenton, which I'm going to very carefully pour on there. Again, it is a bit spicy, so you don't want to go too heavy with it, but we'll give it a nice little sprinkling, and that will carry over and be notable on the palate. Again, I want to gently turn our meatloaf over so we can evenly season. And obviously this method won't give you a 100% full emulsification and incorporation of your ingredients. Right now I'm just doing it to give us, again, the most surface area that we can season. We will go back and fully mix everything in once we have our other ingredients. Again, we'll go with the pimenton, not too much, adobo, and smoked paprika. We already seasoned it with salt, so we're good there. Now, let's go ahead and throw our aromatics in. We're just going to scatter. These are our onions, and these have been previously small diced. Actually, more of a mince, really, a little bit smaller than small dice. If they're too big, it might create little openings and crevices in the meatloaf that could allow moisture to escape, which we don't want. Minced garlic, Also, all of these vegetables were gently roasted at about 350 degrees in the oven, a little bit of olive oil, and our featured spices, as well as a little kosher salt. The reason I previously cooked them is because if you try to put them in raw, they tend to release moisture in the form of water within their structure, which will not do great things for our meatloaf and may even dilute the flavor a little bit. So next thing, we'll throw on our panko breadcrumbs. And for our eggs, what I like to do is to crack the eggs into a separate container and then mix them. That way you can be sure you won't have any shells in your meatloaf that you'll have to try and fish out. And fishing out shells in a meatloaf is not fun. Crack the egg on a flat surface. That will allow the shell to break more evenly. And it prevents, for instance, if you did it on an edge like some people may do, that will actually impact the shell. So the outer shell may contaminate the inner egg, which we don't want. So just gently tap on a flat surface. And I'll go ahead and mix these eggs up. Again, breaking them up ahead of time will prevent you from having to scramble them, if you will, in the meatloaf, and thereby, again, overworking that meatloaf. And if my little solo wasn't enough to convince you not to overwork your meatloaf, then I'm not sure what will. But I've got faith. You're going to do a fantastic job with it. All right. We'll go ahead in with the milk. It's 1 cup of whole milk. And we have altogether, it is about 3.5 pounds of our meatloaf mixture. So we had 3 eggs, 1 cup of milk, our seasonings, kosher salt, and our aromatics. That was 1/2 cup of onion that's been cooked, and 1/4 cup each carrot and celery, and then 1 tablespoon of minced garlic. And then, of course, the 1/4 cup of the panko breadcrumbs. And now for the chili chipotles and adobo, I'm actually going to use only part of these. The other part will go into our glaze. That's right, we're going to glaze this meatloaf with a delicious ketchup-based glaze, which will add tons of flavor and help to caramelize the outside. So we'll just put those right in. And that should be enough. Again, these are also pretty spicy, so we don't want to overdo it on the spices. And you want to have your oven preheated at 375 degrees. Once we have our meatloaf ready and molded, we'll bake it for about 25 minutes before we put our glaze on, which I'll show you to make in just a minute. And then another 15 minutes will give you a perfectly cooked meatloaf. So let's go ahead and get to the mixing. Again, we're not over mixing. We're just gently incorporating all the ingredients. And I can already smell, this is the great part about hands-on cooking, the aromas that emanate from your mixture. It's really phenomenal. The pimenton, the adobo, the smoked paprika, it's really fantastic. And so I'm kind of using a fold-over method, which is common in bread making, for instance. But then to incorporate the ingredient gently, I'm just gently closing my fingers, which help to incorporate everything evenly. And we're just going to do it till it's nicely combined. And if you have a whole chipotle in there, you can go ahead and just kind of break that up. They're very tender, so just break that up separately from the meat. You can do that ahead of time too if you want. And you can feel this is an absolutely perfect consistency for our meatloaf. It's nicely packed in this nice bundle, so you know that once you pack it as a meatloaf, it will bake nice and evenly. And now that we have it thoroughly mixed, what we're going to do is put it into this loaf pan. Now, oftentimes you'll see recipes that tell you to cook it in a loaf pan. Here's something I picked up along my culinary journey. Actually, if you want beautiful, even roasting and caramelization of the exterior of your meatloaf, what you want to do is use the loaf pan in order to create that shape so that it will stay and hold in that shape while you're cooking it. But then we're going to turn it over and remove it from the pan so that we can shape it more thoroughly on the actual roasting pan. Basically, the reason for that is that when you have it in this roasting pan in the oven, what's happening to the exterior of it is that it's kind of trapping steam, and you'll end up steaming your beautiful meatloaf and have a very sort of drab color, if you will, rather than getting nice caramelization from the oven, which allows all of the exposed sides to receive that full convection heat from our oven. And that's what we want. So again, I'm just putting it in here to shape it. I'm not pushing too hard. I'm just gently pressing to fill in all the areas. This is a 9-inch by 5-inch loaf pan, which for the 3.5 pounds of meatloaf mix that we used is seemingly pretty perfect. Now we're just going to invert. This part can be a little tricky, but I gave it a little bit of a force, but not too hard. And ideally, it should come off with ease. I'm going to remove one glove just so I can grab a tool to help lift the loaf pan. So just hold one side, and then you can kind of wiggle a spoon or a fork underneath. There we go. And it should come out nice and easily. Perfect. And now in order for it, we basically want a 1-inch thickness to our meatloaf. That will cook the most easily, and the reason I didn't just put the meatloaf mix here and start shaping it is because this gives us a good starting shape to work with so that I don't have to make too many moves and put too much pressure on our meatloaf, which would again overwork the meatloaf. So, and that is not what we want to do. So I'm just going to tap it evenly to make the shape nice and even, because yes, from an aesthetic point of view, it's nice to have it even, but more importantly and more crucial is the fact that it will cook more evenly throughout the meatloaf, and that is what we're looking for. Evenly cooked, caramelized, delicious. Now that we have about 1 inch in thickness, we can go ahead and move on, and we're going to bake it. I add a little bit more salt over the top just to season it like you would a roast. We're going to place that in the 375-degree oven, as I said, for about 25 minutes before we glaze it. The glaze is very simple. Ketchup, brown sugar, corn syrup, and a little bit of our chipotle. Brown sugar goes in, ketchup, and this is a really traditional glaze, which I think works really well. The corn syrup adds an extra sort of luxuriousness to it. Also helps to caramelize our meatloaf nicely. And then, of course, to spice it up a bit, We'll add in more of our chipotles. And we'll go ahead and whisk this all together. That will be our glaze that we will spread on the meatloaf. I'm going to add in a little kosher salt as well, which helps to bring out all the other flavors, not to mention our spices, just to carry on a contiguous flavor throughout. Okay. We'll give that a good mix and set the glaze aside. And next up, we have beautiful coconut creamed spinach. So creamed spinach is a really great accoutrement to serve with your meatloaf. Really classic and delicious. And in this case, I'm using a little coconut milk to add a little bit of a cooling element that goes nicely with these spices. So that spiced meatloaf will be a bit more tone and enjoyable with the creamed spinach. We have here butter and flour to make a roux. The roux is what will thicken our milk-based creamed spinach, the cream element of it. We'll melt melt the butter, then add in our flour to make the roux. And in this other pot, we'll have our milk ingredients. This is 1.5 cups of whole milk and 1 can or 13.5 ounces of coconut milk. So we'll get that heated, and to aromatize that, we'll put in a half of an onion. Our butter's just about fully melted, so we'll sprinkle on our flour. This will make the roux. Turn the pan down a little so we don't scorch. And this is beautiful manchego cheese to finish the creamed spinach. And of course, on Nutmeg TV, a little fresh nutmeg introduced to our milk will enhance some of the subtlety of the finished product. We'll go ahead and mix that nicely. And then you're going to want to cook your roux to cook the rawness out of the flour mixture. You're going to want to cook it for about 8 to 10 minutes, just until it's nice and smells really nutty and aromatic, and the raw flavor is gone. We have fresh spinach here. That's, of course, going to be the star of our creamed spinach. So once your milks, the coconut milk and the whole milk, come to a simmer, we're going to go ahead and add in our roux. And you're just going to want to go ahead in with all of that. That's about 3 ounces of butter and 3 ounces of flour altogether, which will beautifully thicken the 1.5 cups of whole milk and our can of coconut milk. And then this process is actually quite a lot simpler than it may seem at first. All of this spinach will very quickly, as soon as it's added to the pan, once it comes to a simmer, it will very quickly wilt and become cooked. And to save us a little time, I've done that ahead of time. And so you can see the finished product right there. It's a really great viscosity, absolute delicious flavor. And you can see how nicely the roux, the flour and butter mixture, thickened up that milk situation. We'll add our cheese. And there you have a beautiful coconut creamed spinach. It's going to be wonderful with our meatloaf. At this point, we want to glaze our meatloaf and put it in for another 15 to 20 minutes, depending. We want a nice, beautiful caramelized exterior. And once your meatloaf is finally cooked, after the glaze has been applied, you can get ready to slice away. Now, once you take it out of the oven, after the internal temperature reaches about 150, we want 155 total as the end result for ground beef. But it will carry over once it's removed from the oven. So we can take it to 150 confidently. And alas, our beautifully glazed meatloaf that has rested appropriately. Really delicious aroma coming from it. Just going to go ahead and get it on our cutting board so we can slice it. I like to use a slicing knife to cut our meatloaf. And you can see it's nicely cooked on the inside. I like to serve about 3/4 of an inch pieces. Usually I'll serve it family style. This one just so you can see the beautiful interior of that meatloaf, all those aromatics, the chipotles, all those wonderful fragrant spices and aromas coming out. And right next to it, we'll put in our beautiful creamed spinach. We'll go ahead and make 2 nice even piles. And that is just going to be so delightful. Such a nice counterbalance to the spiced meatloaf, which is going to be an incredible experience. I can't wait to hear how it came out for you at home. Thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of Pursuit of Passion. If you haven't already, you can go ahead and download the Nutmeg TV app to be able to see all of the episodes. You can also head to www.pursuitofpassion.net. That's my website in order to link to the videos as well as full recipes for all of the videos. Please enjoy. I hope it inspired you to cook memorable meals for you and your loved ones. Thank you so much, and please be well on your pursuit of passion.
Nick Augustino right here at the East Side Restaurant. We always have the complete full dinner menu. Knockwurst, bratwurst, sauerbraten, potato pancakes, red cabbage, rice pudding, cream pies, all the desserts that Germany had to offer. I always do something different. Yes, I do. I brought seafood to the beer garden at the East Side Restaurant. East Side Restaurant, your German destination restaurant in Connecticut. Tiki-taka, tiki-taka, hoi, hoi, hoi!
Follow us on Instagram at nutmeg.tv.